The courtroom fell into a respectful hush as the spectators filed to their seats, not in anticipation of the arguments to come, but out of deference to the man in handcuffs seated at the defendant's table. Tariq Anders, tall, dark-skinned, and bearing the quiet strength of a lifetime's discipline, sat perfectly still. His broad shoulders squared his expression, composed yet alert. To most of the onlookers, he appeared simply as another black man in trouble, but those who knew of his service recognized the faint glint of metals that rarely saw the light of public view. A retired Navy SEAL, he had walked through some of the most harrowing missions of recent history, collecting commendations he seldom mentioned and carrying scars he never displayed. Before we continue, we'd really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us get closer to 1,000 subscribers. It means the world to us. Thank you so much. Behind him, Officer Colin Riggsen stood with a smirk of self-assured authority. A white man of average build, he believed he had captured yet another troublemaker. This one allegedly guilty of disturbing the peace at a neighborhood grocery store. In truth, Tariq had merely inquired why he was singled out for being denied service when everyone else was served without a second thought. That simple question, posed in calm tones, set off a chain of events he could never have foreseen. Moments earlier, Riggsen had roughly shoved Tariq to the ground and barked, "Get up," despite the fact that Tariq was already on his feet. It was an unambiguous display of power. I am the law and you will obey. Yet here in the stillness of the courtroom, that power seemed to hang by a thread. The stale air carried the weight of untold histories of valor and prejudice, of service and subjugation, all converging on the figure who sat unmoving beneath the bright overhead lights. And so the stage was set, with each pair of eyes waiting to see whether truth or authority would prevail when the gavel finally fell. In the thick tension of that moment, Tariq remained as composed as if he were still standing watch on some distant shore. With deliberate calm, he reached inside his shirt and touched the gleaming SEAL Trident badge pinned over his heart. A faint, knowing smile curved his lips, an unspoken challenge in the face of authority. From the back row, a hushed voice broke the charged silence. "That's a real SEAL. Google him." Heads turned, phones lit up, and an undercurrent of surprise rippled through the courtroom. Exactly then, the heavy oak doors swung open. Judge Rosalind Thornton, her silver hair pulled back in a stern knot, entered with the measured steps. The bailiff's gavel tapped once as he called the court to rise, and every attendee stood some still, holding their whispers in midair until the judge took her seat. Once the room fell silent again, the prosecutor attempted to paint Tariq as unpredictable and aggressive, describing the grocery incident in dramatic terms. But Tariq sat motionless, his gaze unwavering, fixed on Officer Riggsen as though daring him to say more. In that suspended hush, you could feel years of service and sacrifice pressing against the walls. The prosecutor's words struck the air, but found no purchase in Tariq's steady bearing. His silence spoke volumes. He would not be hurried, he would not be rattled. Everyone leaned forward, waiting for him to break, yet he did not. The only sound was the soft rustle of robes and the judge's quiet breathing, as if the very room conspired to protect the dignity of that silent figure. And in that pregnant pause, it became clear to all. This was more than a courtroom drama. It was a reckoning between unquestioned power and the quiet authority earned by a lifetime of honorable service. No one in that solemn courtroom anticipated what happened next. Without warning, Officer Riggsen's boot shot forward, landing squarely against Tariq's midsection. A collective gasp rose from the benches as Tariq stumbled, though he did not cry out. Instead, he pivoted on his heel and locked eyes with Riggs in a steady, unblinking stare that seemed to halt time. The clatter of his cuffed hands echoed softly against the wooden rail as he steadied himself, the hush deepening into a tangible tension. Recovering his composure, Tariq lifted his chin slightly, his voice low and resonant, filling every corner of the room. "Your Honor," he began, pausing only to ensure everyone heard each word. "I served this country for 20 years. I protected men like Officer Riggsen, and I shielded those who looked nothing like him. I've watched brothers fall, navigated every kind of fire and fear, and today I stand here struck in my own courtroom." His calm delivery carried the weight of unspoken battlefields and silent sacrifices. The sheer dignity in his tone struck harder than any blow, laying bare a truth more powerful than any legal argument. Across the room, jurors shifted in their seats. Some faces softened with regret, others frowned, confronted by the raw injustice of the moment. The judge's gavel lay unused, a stark reminder that decorum could not shield Riggsen's misuse of authority. Even the bailiff paused mid-step, caught between duty and disbelief. In that suspended silence, Tariq's words resonated far beyond the lectern. They transcended the specifics of the case and spoke to every veteran, every citizen who had ever worn the uniform, and every observer who knew honor could not be coerced. And as the final echo of his statement faded, the courtroom understood that nothing, not rank, not handcuffs, not brute force, could silence the truth of a life dedicated to service. With deliberate calm, Tariq reached inside his uniform and drew forth the gleaming gold seal trident badge, an emblem of courage earned through fire and sacrifice. The badge caught the courtroom lights, scattering brief, bright flares across polished wood and solemn faces. A hush fell so deep it felt like the walls themselves held their breath. Every pair of eyes turned to him as he held the symbol high, letting its weight and its meaning speak for itself. Judge Thornton, her silver hair framing a face etched with decades of service to the law, leaned forward. Her voice was low but carried the full authority of her bench. Remove his handcuffs. At once the bailiff moved, unlocking the cold steel cuffs that had bound Tariq's wrists so unjustly. The clink of metal falling to the floor sounded like church bells tolling a return to justice. A collective exhale rippled through the courtroom as the sound resonated. Then the judge's gaze sharpened, and she pointed directly at Officer Riggsen. Officer Riggsen, you are under arrest for assault in my courtroom. This bench does not tolerate violence, especially against a decorated veteran. Riggsen's smirk vanished, replaced by a stunned pallor. He stood rooted to the spot as new cuffs were snapped onto his wrist, cuffs that once belonged to Tariq, now securing the man who had wielded them unjustly. The weight of the moment settled over everyone present. No one spoke, there was nothing to say. The roles had reversed with stark clarity. The decorated warrior was free, while the man who abused his badge was bound. For a heartbeat, the air hung heavy with disbelief and relief. Then as the bailiffs led Riggsen away, the silent message remained: in a place where sworn duty meets raw power, truth and honor will always prevail. Officer Riggsen was marched from the courtroom under formal charges of assault and abuse of power, his once defiant posture now bowed by the weight of his own actions. Behind him, murmurs rippled through the gallery. Some visitors lowered their heads in shame. Others furtively wiped tears from their cheeks. It was as though the very air breathed a collective apology. Tariq Anders rose from the witness table and returned to his seat at the defense table, his movement unhurried and dignified. He settled in as if resuming a familiar place in the world, a world where he had served his country with honor. His calm presence contrasted sharply with the turmoil of the moment. Oliver Stanton, Tariq's attorney, sprang to his feet, pride evident in every line of his face. "Your Honor," he said, voice firm yet warm. "My client need not utter another word. The truth has spoken for itself." Even in victory, he showed restraint, acknowledging that justice had already been done. Tariq offered a small, gracious smile. "I have no need for further words," he replied quietly, each syllable carrying the quiet strength of a man who had lived by action rather than speech. His gaze swept the courtroom not with triumph, but with the serenity of one who knows his integrity is intact. Judge Thornton rapped her gavel decisively. "Court is adjourned until further notice," she declared. The single knock echoed like a benediction, sealing the moment in the hall's hushed grandeur. As the spectators filed out, their footsteps muted on the polished floor, the air remained thick with reverence. No one spoke. None were eager to break the solemn stillness that followed. In that lingering silence, it was clear that something profound had taken place. The courtroom had witnessed not only the reversal of injustice, but the restoration of dignity. And although the gavel's echo had faded, its message endured: truth and honor will always outlast power misused. When court adjourned, Judge Thornton surprised everyone by descending from the bench and pausing before Tariq's table. Her stern features softened as she looked him squarely in the eye. "I have a brother who served," she said quietly, her voice thick with sincerity. "You deserve every ounce of respect." Tariq met her gaze, then inclined his head in a gesture of heartfelt gratitude. Stepping outside, the hallways instantly transformed into a media scrum. Reporters jostled for position, pressing microphones forward with breathless urgency. "Police officer arrested after assaulting retired Navy SEAL," blared one camera's caption. "SEAL attacked in his own courtroom, read another news ticker. Flashbulbs popped as journalists shouted questions eager for the next soundbite. In the midst of the frenzy, Oliver Stanton leaned in close to Tariq and whispered, "Your charges are dropped, but we'll pursue this lawsuit. We'll make sure justice is served." Tariq paused, considering the promise of a settlement, the public apology, even the prospect of financial compensation. Then he shook his head almost imperceptibly. "Money isn't what I'm after," he replied softly. "I want change." His words rang clear amid the chaos. The courtroom violence had already sparked conversations in police stations, veterans' halls, and lawmakers' offices. Now Tariq hoped it would translate into real reform, mandatory sensitivity, training, clear protocols for identifying veterans, accountability for officers who abuse their power. As the crowd dispersed, many paused to offer nods of respect or simple thank yous for services rendered. Tariq stepped into the sunlight, breathing deeply as if waking from a long, harrowing dream. He wasn't seeking headlines or accolades. He wanted the system to remember that those who wore the uniform, regardless of race, had earned not only medals, but unfailing respect. And in that moment, it seemed his quiet insistence on true change might finally be heard. That evening, the courtroom footage exploded across social media, the blinding glare of flashbulbs, the roar of the gavel ending the hearing, the kick that floored a decorated veteran, and then Tariq's steady voice standing tall against injustice. By midnight, Stand With Tariq and Raw Final Shot had gone viral. News feeds flooded with shares demanding transparency and accountability. Former service members and SEAL teammates posted messages of support recounting their own narrow escapes and sacrifices. A handful of senators issued public apologies, and even a former president acknowledged the incident as a stain on our values. Footage remixers overlaid Tariq's calm declaration, "I served 20 years, and this should never happen," against patriotic music, turning his words into a rallying cry. Yet amid the online fervor, Tariq slipped away from the noise. He drove home in the dim glow of dashboard lights, the sunset bleeding crimson across the sky like a silent reminder. At his modest porch, he sat alone with a steaming cup of black coffee in his weathered hands. The world had shifted beneath his feet. He could feel it in every headline and every comment. People recognized him now not as a defendant, but as a symbol of dignity under assault. And while the calls and texts poured in, offers of speaking engagements, interviews, even paid lectures, Tariq took another sip and let the hush of dusk settle around him. In that quiet, he reflected that true change rarely springs from noise. It lives in small acts of recognition, the nod of a driver passing by, the gratitude in a child's wave. Justice, he knew, would be measured in the policies rewritten and the hearts opened long after hashtags trended. As darkness fell and the last light faded from the horizon, he cradled his coffee, letting the silence speak its promise. Tomorrow the fight would continue, but tonight at least his country had seen the man behind the uniform. 2 weeks later, the courtroom doors swung open once more, this time to admit Officer Colin Riggsen as the defendant. His suit hung wrinkled on his shoulders, his tie askew, and his face drawn with exhaustion. His attorney sat beside him, paling visibly, as the flurry filled to a capacity with curious onlookers and old comrades of Tariq. The air crackled with anticipation. Across the room, Tariq Anders stood quietly at the edge of the defense table, a silent sentinel of justice. He offered no gloat, no triumphant grin, only his steady presence, a living reminder of integrity under pressure. When Colin's lawyer finally rose to speak, fumbling through legalese and half-hearted excuses, the courtroom grew restless. Clearly, they were waiting for something more than words. At last, Colin took the stand, trying to defend his actions as routine enforcement. His voice trembled, betraying a flicker of fear as he claimed he had no choice. That was when Tariq spoke, his tone calm but firm, his words echoing through the room. "I bear no anger toward you. I have endured far more in 20 years of service than a single misjudged moment could inflict. Yet no one deserves to be beaten like an animal, especially not someone who wore this country's uniform." Judge Thornton inclined her head, her expression grave. She banged her gavel once, twice, and pronounced sentence 18 months in county jail, plus mandatory racial sensitivity and ethics training. A collective exhale swept the courtroom as Colin protested weakly, then fell silent when new cuffs clicked around his wrists. The sound rang out like a final bell, sealing the verdict not just on him, but on every officer present. In that resonant moment, the scales of justice balanced at last. Tariq turned away without a word, the courtroom's hush following his every step. Outside, the world awaited the ripple effect of a single act, proof that courage, when met by true accountability, can restore faith in the rule of law. As Tariq stepped into the fading light and approached his car, a small voice rang out. "Thank you for your service, Mr. Anders." He turned to see a boy on a bicycle, cheeks flushed with excitement. Tariq paused, allowing himself a genuine smile. "You used to call me a seal," he said softly, "but now I'm retired." The boy giggled shyly and waved before pedaling off into the dusk. In that simple moment, so far removed from the courtroom's roar, Tariq felt the day's weight lift just a little. He slid into the driver's seat, the worn leather creaking under his frame, and allowed himself to reflect. He had never sought medals or parades. His service had been its own reward. Today, justice had been served without vengeance, and a broken system had taken a small step toward healing. Looking out at the empty street, Tariq thought of the countless veterans who marched into battle unseen and unheard. He'd stood up in a room that should have honored him, and in doing so, he'd reminded strangers, officials, and colleagues that dignity is not granted by rank or skin color. It is earned by one's actions and defended by one's resolve. He reached for the ignition, and as the engine rumbled to life, he understood that his fight was not over, but it had changed. The cheers of strangers and the promise of reforms would echo beyond headlines. In the quiet that followed, Tariq knew true service doesn't crave recognition. It plants seeds of trust that, with time, grow into lasting respect. And tonight, under the gentle glow of streetlights, he carried that knowledge home. From this story, we learn that justice does not always require loud proclamations to prevail. Sometimes a single moment of calm, a firm statement, and an emblem of legacy can shift the balance. The deepest message is this: any one of us can spark change when we dare to confront injustice and uphold our dignity. If I were in the protagonist's place, I would use that experience to champion reform, participating in dialogue sessions between law enforcement and communities, collaborating with human rights organizations, and supporting cultural sensitivity training for police officers. I would share my story at universities and social justice forums to remind everyone that respect is not a privilege, but the basic right of every citizen. As for whether racism will truly end by 2050, the answer depends on our individual and collective efforts today. If each generation learns to elevate, awareness teaches children about equality, and continually opposes all forms of discrimination, then by mid-century we might glimpse a horizon of fairness. However, we mustn't await a miracle. True progress comes only when every member of society commits to action, from voting for equitable policies and taking diversity training to standing up for one another against prejudice. Only then, when we persistently move forward together, can racism give way to unity and respect by the year 2050. This journey demands perseverance and courage, but if we do not relent, justice and mutual esteem will ultimately triumph.